So this year I have definitely not read all of the new releases that I wanted to. Let's face it, I never wind up reading all of the new releases that I want to because there are so many good books coming out and they just kind of pile up from years past. But I've compiled a little list of the ones that I have read and that I love enough to be able to say that they are my top new released books of the year. So let's start with science fiction and fantasy. You've heard me rave about The Ruin of Kings. I initially read this in 4 days, and I believe it only took me 5 days on the second time around. Yes, I've read it twice this year, and I absolutely love it. I love this book initially for the style, because it's written like it's evidence being presented to this ruler about an event that happens at the end of the book. So it's got footnotes throughout, and that really reminded me of one of my other favorite books, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. But this one is set in a secondary fantasy world. It's got really great world building, and it was just unputdownable. I loved the way that it was written. It really made sense to have both first and third person narration in this book. The reason being because most of the book is a conversation between two people in a jail cell. It's between the person who is the prisoner, who is talking about his life, and he starts when he's being sold as a slave on the auction block, and then his jailer, who is this demon that devours the memories of people that she eats, or is just around for a very long time, like him. She says, no, that's the wrong place to start. And she begins his story 6 months prior from the point of view of everybody in his life who he happens to have encountered. And the dual timelines worked really, really well. Now, the other books I don't have physical copies of yet. Christmas is coming, so I have high hopes of getting a gift card that I can then use to buy the books that I have absolutely loved this year and want on my shelf. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. This is my first book by Ann Leckie, and I have to go out and get her other books now because it was just written so beautifully. I didn't know if I would like a book written in second person, but this one again really made sense to have it written that way. It's from the point of view of a god who's talking to this person in their domain, and throughout the book, the god is talking directly to the person and narrating, this is what I think you're thinking based on your body language and stuff like that. So there's a lot of mystery to the actual story. The book starts when the protagonist is coming back to the city, and in the city there is this ruler who has suddenly gone missing, and although the person that the protagonist is traveling with should have been the heir and elevated to that status the moment his father died, in this case his uncle usurped the seat. So there's a lot of political intrigue, trying to figure out what happened to his father, and trying to figure out if now the city has lost the favor of their god because of the way this went about, and it's really, really interesting. And one of the things I really liked about The Raven Tower is the way that Ann Leckie pulled on our world to create the secondary world. There's a lot of evolution in this book, which I found really, really interesting. Like the god has been alive for a very, very long time. So the god is talking about how they used to be underwater, and then the sea kind of receded, and there's creatures coming up and becoming bipedals, and now there's nomads that worship this god. And I really loved all of the evolution and the anthropology that went into creating these societies. It just added so much depth to this book. I definitely need this one for my shelf. Now, much later in the year, I picked up Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. I picked it up because it was billed as lesbian necromancers in space, and I wanted something that was really atmospheric and spooky for my October read, and this definitely fit that description. It also had a really nice dry humor to it, and I Also liked the intrigue. The story takes place in this sort of tournament where each necromancer is attempting to discover how to become immortal. And throughout this tournament, the necromancers are slowly being killed off, and nobody knows why. Is it a part of this mysterious place that they're in? Is it one of the other necromancers? It's really, really interesting. And it was a book that I really couldn't put down once I got into it. Now this year I discovered Rebecca Roanhorse. I absolutely love her Sixth World series, and I won't talk about Trail of Lightning because that was out in 2018, but the sequel, Storm of Locusts, came out in 2019. I loved it. That was another book that I just breezed right through. It's packed with a lot of action. I love the mythology. It takes place on a Navajo reservation turned sovereign nation, although in this book they kind of depart outside of that and see the apocalyptic world outside of Dinetah. And I really, really enjoyed it. This series has just got such interesting world building. It's got really great characters. I love Maggie. Maggie is the ass-kicking protagonist, and the supporting characters that are around her are just really fantastic as well. In Storm of Locusts, there was a new character that was introduced. Her name is Ben, and she's bisexual, and she just lost her uncle, so she's kind of leaning on Maggie a little bit for guidance. She's a teenager, and I just really enjoyed her as a character. I hope that she's in further books. The only thing that this book lacked that the first book had was the romance between Kai and Maggie. Kai was almost not in this book at all, but because of all the action and because of the way it was driven, I really didn't notice that lack all that much, and I really, really enjoy it. So that's my list of my favorite 2019 releases for this year. I can't wait for all of the incredible books that I'm going to be reading next year, some of which have been released this year and I just didn't get around to them, and some of which are being released next year. And because I didn't end up reading everything on my 2019 release list, if I've missed a science fiction and fantasy book that you read that came out this year that you really, 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 really loved, please put it in the comments, because I want to make sure that that is on my list for next year. Until next time, happy reading. Would he like to lay down? Will he help? I know help is not really in his vocabulary, but come here.